Hello. So it's been a while since I posted, and it's about time I did another update of the system. Why, you might ask? Well, you might. So some people have been kind enough to do a playtest, and I've done some other playthroughs with some other kind people from my church. And the upshot of all this kindness is I've made a few changes. Nothing major, so just some tweaks. Firstly, one of the issues I've discovered is that power creep is real and it affects us all. Well, it doesn't really affect everyone, but a little bit does go a long way. So power creep essentially means that over time characters get more and more powerful, such that the main character or player needs to fight increasingly more powerful and dangerous villains all the time in order to increase the stakes. So the same thing is kind of happening with some games and also TTRPGs after a while. Each new iteration of a game tends to be more and more diverse. It introduces much greater classes with better abilities, with better weapons, better enemies, and new and more powerful character types, and better and more difficult challenges, mostly to try and overcome any feeling of boredom or sameness that players might feel when playing. And similarly for video games, because there's such a huge turnout of content, often the new iterations focus on better graphics and better weapons and better enemies, rather than focusing on better writing or better storytelling, since that's kind of much harder to do. But anyway, I digress. The thing about designing something is that power creep is a little like scope creep, where you're constantly thinking, what should the player do in this situation? Or what about this situation, or this situation, or this situation, or this situation? And you end up trying to add a whole bunch of stuff to the system just to cover a lot of these possibilities and edge cases. And you're sort of thinking, well, what if they do end up walking across a tightrope over a swimming pool filled with piranhas? So what would they roll for this? And, kind of adding a whole heap of rules just in case. So it becomes much, much crunchier than it really needs to be. So similar to this is a tendency to give more players more points and more modifiers to add to their rolls, especially at the beginning, so that the players are more likely to do well, no matter what they roll, and therefore the players feel more heroic. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. The only issue is that it reduces the stakes. If every roll is guaranteed to be successful, then it's no longer a matter of failing, it's a matter of how successful you will be. Enemies then have to be stronger, difficulties have to be greater. The whole thing quickly becomes very massive in terms of power scaling. So what happened when I was playtesting is I started off giving every character a lot of initial points for modifiers, and then everyone started rolling, and the results were very high for some unknown reason, so that everything they did was very easy. And it got to the point where, even though the idea of the system to try to get the results to settle more into the limited success range, where a roll would give sort of further complications and add to the story, add to the narrative, the amount of modifiers that I actually added to any roll meant that they would instead, when they rolled, they would succeed very easily, which made it become less of an issue of, am I going to succeed or not, and more that was just a foregone conclusion, and it became less interesting. So the upshot is I divided all the modifiers in half to make it a little more challenging. So attributes get 3 points to divide between 4 of them, talents get 5 points between them. This means it's much harder to get a higher roll, but it does mean that players have to depend more on using things like motivations and gifts, but also on helping each other. And that's good, because that's one of the things I want the game to do. That's something I want to promote, because we are supposed to be working together. It's a team game rather than necessarily an individual one. The other thing that was interesting is that almost consistently, no one wanted to fight. Engage in combat. After spending time trying to design a combat system, I discovered that almost no one wants to use it. Instead, everyone wants to resolve conflicts in a social way, by negotiating or influencing or even tricking or bluffing their way through to a victory, as long as they achieve their objective, whatever it was. This isn't a bad thing, but it does mean that the challenge as a designer is that the social conflict aspect of the game needs to be as consistently interesting and equally engaging as the physical. And I find social conflict harder to perform, especially myself as a game master, especially because I suck at doing voices. But it does, as a system, possibly allow more variety in terms of how the conflict develops and can be resolved. Since at least in our games, there was a lot more possibilities in the ways in which the conflict might be resolved socially than how it could be resolved physically, especially because conflict became much more of a social puzzle in which the players were trying to find the best ways of negotiating and talking their enemies around rather than just attacking them. One of my amazingly kind playtesters suggested having a one-shot which is almost solely conflict, just to focus on that aspect and to make sure the system sort of all hangs together and it's fun. So that's probably what I will do in the future. Probably on the Discord as soon as I can put together a story. The last thing, as those who watch my videos know, I've been trying to design the game to move away from a long-form campaigns and more into episodic sessions that revolve around a single location, like a town or a city, and then have each of the sessions be a self-contained adventure to achieve an objective, but that goes towards a larger goal, like episodes in a TV series. Mostly, the reason is as a way of changing the game to suit the fact that most players drop in and out of playing, so you don't always get the same people every week. And if you're in the middle of something, in the middle of a combat or something like that, it makes it very difficult to continue. So the idea is that having it episodic and having an objective for each episode or each session, it's flexible enough to cope with people's changing schedules rather than demanding that people change to suit the game. So the game can be flexible enough around people. So far, these kinds of sessions are going good. They're going pretty well, even if I need to often strip them back to the essentials in order to get them under 2 hours. But the upshot is that if anyone does want to assist in a playthrough, you can be assured that it shouldn't take any longer than an average movie. And a lot of the filler is removed. And that's about it. As usual, thanks again for listening. And if you're interested in seeing more, feel free to watch some of the other videos on the channel or like and subscribe if you want to. If you're not interested, but you're still watching up to this point, then again, thank you for your time.